right now, what we're going to do is just honor the fact that tomorrow is Japan Day, and that's an honor of the fact that we are here in Osaka. Sibos is being held in Japan. And ahead of that day tomorrow, what we want to do is talk a little bit about the Japanese economy, third largest economy in the world. We've gathered some experts to tell us all about it, educate us about it a little bit further. Hiroshi Kawagoe is the General Manager, Transaction Business Planning Department at Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation. Also with us is William Saito. He's the founder and CEO of Intercore. And Tim Tynan is the Managing Director, Head of City Transaction Services in Japan. Gents, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with you, Hiroshi, first of all. Tell us a little bit about the trends that you've been seeing in the Japanese economy over the last 2 or 3 years.
Actually, first of all, you might have negative impression for Japanese economy. I think this is due to the long-lasting deflation or the history of, lost decades or something like that. However, the Japanese banking sector shows solid performance for last few years. I heard the number of delegates from Japan for this year's Sibos exceeded 1,700. And the number of delegates from Asia Pacific exceeded those from EMEA for the first time. I think this shows, this indicates the current situation very well. Of course, we have some issues to consider, such as the demographics in Japan or the globalization for Japanese SMEs.
So tell us what your take is then, William, on how we can deal with these issues, the demographics in Japan and the globalization of these SMEs.
Yeah, so Japan has an interesting dynamics. A quarter of the population is now over 65 years old. So it's the fastest aging population in the world. All sectors, not just banking, have to address this. I think the banking sector has addressed this just because a lot of the elderly are taken advantage of in, for example, fraud and complaints, and so how that is handled. Another interesting demographics in Japan is the number of convenience stores. There's approximately 45,000 convenience stores, so it's interesting to see how the banking sector works with that infrastructure to become more innovative. And I think finally, Japan is leading in the area of electronic wallets, where for about the last 10 years, we have these e-payment cards to do everything from purchasing at convenience stores to riding the subway and taxis. And so there's been a lot of innovations. The problem is really getting outside of Japan.
Okay, so Citi, how is it doing in Japan, and what does it see for the future here?
Yeah, well, Kavita, some of the trends we're tracking that are in alignment with my colleagues are things like the globalization that's taking place in the world, and Japan's very much part of that, and urbanization is something else we see, and then back to innovation and technology, the whole digitization that's taking place, and Japanese companies are very much in alignment with that. You know, as firms here invest and expand in places like Southeast Asia or Latin America, and we see the trade flows between those two corridors. Citi's very much focusing our capabilities and solutions and our global network to help those Japanese clients expand. Same is true as you see the movement of people into cities, that urban trend that we see and the stress that's putting on infrastructures. So helping city administrators, packaging different services that make more convenience with whether it's collections or payments or movings of funds to help run city administrations is important. And then technology sort of wraps around all those pieces to help actually provide the services.
So it all sounds pretty bullish for the next few years ahead. What could go wrong in Japan?
Possibly the business with China, at the moment.
It's the elephant in the room now, isn't it?
Actually, that's it. So far, there has been no negative impact on our business in China so far. But
if there is, how do you think that will take shape? If there is a negative impact?
We need to watch carefully for the situation for our customer, the business for their business in China might affect. So the situation needs to be watched carefully, I think.
What's your view on how China could affect things for Japan?
It's one of the largest trading partners. It's kind of unfortunate to see it this way, but I think it's one of those, if you were to categorize it an election year issue, but I think more from Japan, both countries are becoming innovative and entrepreneurial at different rates. We rely on each other. I think from the natural progression of things will get fixed and such. It's just a function of how we let that prosper, that we put these things aside and get on with things. I think that's most important.
Well, I mean, I think our economists would say that, domestic consumption is very much tied to exporting as well. And then that impacts what we were speaking about before in terms of the whole global movement and investments in different regions like emerging markets. So it's not good for either country or the region, obviously. I mean, I would hope that it would get solved soon. But the interesting thing here is Japan has shown its resilience in the way it can absorb things. So there'll be movements to other places like the India corridor will pick up some of that slack. Just like when the European banks left much of what was happening in terms of expansion in Asia, that's when the Japanese banks moved in for some of that transaction services type share, as well as Citi and others. So I think there's a resiliency that'll overcome it.
I don't know if you each had a chance to look at or go along to the session yesterday with Larry Hathaway at UBS. Did you manage to go there? If you didn't, one of the things that he talked about was this possibility of the fiscal cliff in the US, and that possibly after the US election, if we see a fall in GDP growth, that could lead the US certainly back into recession. How do you think that will affect the Japanese market and the products and services that you are trying to sell?
Yeah, that's true. The U.S. also the big trading partner of Japan. Therefore, there might be a big impact for our customer. Yeah,
Okay.
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the U.S. was up against that fiscal cliff as well, and it looks like maybe they've passed that, with GDP growth, around 2%. I think Japan seems to be able to absorb the sovereign debt levels that they have, which is the largest in the world. They seem to be able to manage through some of these crises. I mean, just this morning, the Bank of Japan showed monetary easing. So, I think the people here, the economy, the industry, it finds a way to move past that.
Okay, paint a picture for me. 3 years on, when we're in Sibos, I think it's Boston, I'm not sure, when we're in Sibos in 3 years, what will we be saying about the Japanese economy?
I don't know. Difficult question.
Read your tea leaves.
Possibly as I said before, that the Japanese are doing pretty well. Therefore, we can be something we are now.
So you think growth
Yeah.
will continue,
Yeah.
and all looks hunky-dory.
Yeah.
It's all going to be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think along that vein, since the disaster from last year, one of the big mindset changes that I've been seeing is the creation of new ventures and companies. There is a really catalytic event that's going on, and you're seeing a lot of younger people that are venturing and creating these new companies. 3 years from now, I think you're going to see the fruits of that labor, and many of those companies will actually be Japanese who end up in Silicon Valley or places like Singapore, but that will in the end help the Japanese economy, I believe.
Well, I think you'll see things like the government will get its hands on the deflationary issues, that they'll meet some of their targets. I think for inflation that you'll see interest rates slightly rise. I think there'll be a different monetary policy. I think we'll see Japan back on sustained growth, which is the target. And then you'll see a successful city as a partner to many Japanese clients.
Well, let me ask you this. What are organizations, maybe companies like yours, doing to improve growth and keep growth going in this economy?
Yeah, our focus is same, the commercial banking business at the heart of our business, then the transaction banking business we will improve to support our customer. That's the focus.
Okay.
Not my company specifically, but I'm actually working on national strategy for the Prime Minister right now. And the Japanese government is looking on issues on things like how to be innovative, how to become more global, how to address things like failure, which directly tie to the financial industry. And so these things, I think the government is taking actual steps to address them.
What steps are they likely to take? What specific things?
So there are some laws, for example, in the Japanese system that address bankruptcies and how capital gains are calculated. These things are trying to be re-looked at so that they're more fair on a global basis.
Yeah, well, I think funding growth, right, and expansion is one of the main areas, but you can get really tactical with things like even export agency financing. Working with the agencies here like Nexi in Japan to help them with growth in different regions. So that would be all part of the equation.
Okay, well, gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us.